The scorching midday sun turned the barren land into an unforgiving furnace. Dust danced in ghostly swirls down the main street of Copper Creek, a forgotten town that was born and died every dawn in the heart of Arizona territory. The parched timbers of the buildings crackled in the heat, and the hot wind carried the smell of sweat, gunpowder, and despair that pervaded every corner of that god-forsaken place. Jackson Ryder pulled the reins of his bay horse and watched the desolate scene in front of him. At the age of 32, the cowboy carried on his face the deep marks of a hard life on the cattle trails. His calloused hands held tight reins as his blue eyes, faded like the denim of his shirt, scanned every detail of the seemingly deserted city. It was not common to find such a quiet place in broad daylight. Something was wrong. The horse snorted nervously, its flared nostrils picking up a scent Jackson still couldn't identify. It was metallic, heavy, mixed with the acrid odor of burnt gunpowder. The animal stepped backwards, restless, and Jackson had to use all his experience to keep it under control. In his 15 years of walking the trails of the West, he learned to trust the instincts of animals as much as his own. It was then that he heard it. A faint, barely perceptible sound that cut through the oppressive silence like a knife-piercing silk. A cry, a child's cry. Jackson got off his horse with the agility of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. His beaten leather boots touched the dusty ground with a dull noise, kicking up small clouds of red earth that stuck to his leather pants. The sound of crying came from the direction of the saloon, a two-story building with a balcony that was once white, but now sported the yellowish color of time and neglect. As he approached, Jackson noticed the first signs of what happened there. Bullet marks carved into the wooden walls, shattered glass strewn across the floor, abandoned hats and dark stains that the dust could not completely hide. An ambush. A massacre. The crying grew stronger, more desperate, and Jackson felt his heart tighten in his chest. On his long journey through the wilds, he witnessed enough violence to harden any man's soul, but there was something about the vulnerability of that sound that touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the memory of his own childhood, when he cried alone on the cold nights after the Comanches took his family. He climbed the steps of the porch carefully, avoiding the boards that creaked louder. His right hand rested naturally on the handle of the Colt .45 that hung on his hip, not out of suspicion, but out of pure instinct. Whoever was responsible for that carnage might still be around. The interior of the saloon told the full story of the massacre: overturned tables and chairs, broken bottles, a grand piano with its keys stained with blood. 5 men lay scattered around the room, their clothes torn and bloodied, indicating that they had fought bravely before succumbing. The bartender was slumped behind the counter, a shotgun still clutched in his stiff hands. But it was in the darkest corner of the saloon that Jackson found the source of the crying. Half hidden under an overturned table, a baby of perhaps 2 years old writhed in a blanket, soiled with dust and tears. Her blonde hair clung to her sweaty forehead, and her blue eyes sparkled with a fear no child should ever know. Jackson slowly knelt, taking his hat off his head in an instinctive gesture of respect. His trembling hands reached out to the child, who stopped crying for a moment and stared at him with a disturbing intensity. It was as if those blue eyes could see through her soul, reading every scar, every regret, every moment of loneliness she carried. When she finally took the baby in her arms, she felt the small, fragile weight against her chest. The child nestled against him with a confidence that surprised him, as if he recognized in him something familiar, something safe in the midst of the chaos that destroyed his little life. It was then that something happened that would make Jackson question his sanity for the next few days. The baby stopped crying completely, raised his little head, and looked straight into his eyes. And in a voice impossible for his age, a voice that carried a frightening maturity, he whispered a single word that chilled the blood in the cowboy's veins. "Daddy." Jackson was paralyzed for long seconds, holding the baby to his chest as he tried to process what he had just heard. His hands trembled slightly, and he had to lean on the nearest wall so as not to lose his balance. The word echoed in his mind like a cannon shot. "Daddy." How could such a small child speak so clearly? And why did you call him that way? The baby watched him with those piercing blue eyes, as if waiting for an answer Jackson couldn't formulate. There was something disturbing about the child's tranquility now, a stark contrast to the despair of moments before. It was as if the presence of the cowboy brought an inexplicable peace to that small and defenseless being. Jackson forced himself out of the trance and examined the child more closely. His clothes were simple but well-groomed, indicating that he came from a family with modest but decent means. There were no visible injuries, only the dirt and fright of what he witnessed. But there was something more. Around the child's neck, half hidden by the blanket, shone a small silver chain with a locket. With extreme care, Jackson pushed the fabric away and revealed the pendant. It was an oval medallion, engraved with initials that made her heart stop completely. E.R. Eleanor Ryder. The name of his wife, killed 3 years ago in an Apache attack along with her child, still in the womb. His hands began to shake violently, and he had to sit in a nearby chair to keep from fainting. The memories came back like a relentless avalanche. Eleanor, 6 months pregnant, waving to him from the balcony of her small house by the Colorado River. His promise to return in 2 weeks with the money from the sale of the cattle, the black smoke on the horizon when he finally got home. The ashes are still warm, the bodies he never found, but that was impossible. Eleanor and the baby died in the attack. He himself buried the remains of the house, built a wooden cross, and swore on the grave that he would never love anyone again. How could that medallion be there? How could that child exist? The baby held out a tiny little hand and touched Jackson's bearded face as if trying to comfort him. The touch was soft, almost ethereal, but it brought a sense of familiarity that made tears well up in the hardened man's eyes. It was impossible, but there was something about that gesture that reminded Eleanor. The same delicacy, the same ability to soothe your turbulent heart with just one touch. Jackson stood up abruptly, still holding the child, and began to examine the bodies scattered around the saloon more closely. Who were those people? What were they doing there? And more importantly, who was responsible for the massacre? The first body belonged to a middle-aged man, dressed as a merchant. His hands were stained with ink, possibly a type of scribe or accountant. The second was clearly an outlaw, due to the scars on his face and the custom-built holster on his hip. Strange that such different people were in the same place at the same time. It was when he examined the third body that Jackson found the first real clue. A tall, grey-haired man, dressed in an impeccable black suit despite the bloodstains. In his inner pocket, Jackson found a partially burned letter. The words he managed to decipher made his blood run cold. The child must be eliminated. Witness to what happened at Canyon Rock. Eleanor Ryder has discovered the truth. The medallion is the proof. Jackson read and reread the fragments, trying to make sense of those words. Canyon Rock was a ghost town a 2-hour ride away, abandoned after the silver mine was depleted. But what could Eleanor have discovered there? And how was his name involved in that story? The baby began to shake again, but not with crying. This time he pointed insistently to the staircase that led to the second floor of the saloon. His little blue eyes shone with an urgency that Jackson couldn't ignore. It was as if the child wanted to show him something important. Climbing the creaking steps carefully, Jackson reached the upper hallway. There were 4 rooms, 3 with the doors open and 1 locked. The baby kept pointing, now specifically at the closed door. Jackson tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. With a well-aimed kick, the old wood shattered and the door opened. The room was overturned, as if someone was looking for something in desperation. Clothes scattered, drawers open, the mattress torn. But in the corner, half hidden under a loose floorboard, Jackson found a small wooden trunk. Inside it, documents, photographs, and more letters that told an impossible story. Photographs of Eleanor pregnant, but not at their home. He was in Canyon Rock in front of a cabin that Jackson had never seen before. Letters written in his wife's familiar handwriting, dated after her supposed death. And a document that made her legs weaken. A birth certificate in the name of Thomas Ryder, Eleanor Ryder's son and unknown father. The baby in her arms was Thomas, your child. The son he believed dead 3 years ago was alive, growing up far from him, and now orphaned again after witnessing the massacre of his caregivers. But if Thomas was alive, where was Eleanor all those years? Why did she let him believe they both died? And who were the people willing to kill an innocent child to hide some secret? Jackson sat on the shattered bed, holding the son he never knew, trying to process the revelation that changed everything. The baby nestled against him again, whispering a second word that made the cowboy's world come crashing down completely. Mummy. The word mommy echoed in the destroyed room like a ghost from the past, making Jackson feel as if the floor opened up beneath his feet. Thomas kept looking at him with those impossible blue eyes, then pointed to the window that overlooked the hills to the north, in the exact direction of Canyon Rock. Jackson approached the window, still carrying his son in his arms, and observed the undulating horizon where the sun began its slow descent. The Rocky Mountains rose like serrated teeth against the orange sky, and between them, hidden in a narrow valley, was the ghost town that now became the center of all his inquiries. He returned to the wooden trunk and began to examine the documents more carefully. One of Eleanor's letters, dated just 6 months ago, mentioned a man named Marcus Blackwood and something about documents that can destroy powerful families. Another paper in different, more formal handwriting told of a secret mine at Canyon Rock that was never officially registered and profits being diverted to accounts in eastern banks. But it was a specific photograph that made Jackson understand the magnitude of what Eleanor discovered. In the image, 5 men posed in front of the entrance to a mine, smiling and confident. Jackson recognized 3 of them immediately: Judge Morrison, the most powerful man in the county; Colonel Hampton, owner of half the territory of Arizona; and the banker Sutherland, who controlled the money of practically every wealthy family in the region. The other 2 men were unknown, but their expensive clothes and arrogant postures indicated that they also belonged to the local elite. On the back of the photograph in Eleanor's careful handwriting was written, "The real reason Canyon Rock was abandoned. They killed dozens of miners to hide the silver. Marcus has the evidence." Jackson felt a surge of anger and understanding at the same time. Eleanor did not die in the Apache attack. She discovered something that powerful people wanted hidden and had to fake her own death to protect herself and her son. But why didn't you trust him? Why did she let him suffer for 3 years believing that he had lost everything? A new letter provided the painful answer. In Eleanor's trembling handwriting, Jackson read words that cut through her soul. "My dear Jackson, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep Thomas safe. Forgive me for letting you believe we were dead, but I discovered terrible things about men you considered friends. Colonel Hampton isn't just his employer. He's the leader of a group that kills anyone who threatens his secrets. When I found out what they did at Canyon Rock, I knew that our entire family would be in danger. I faked our death, hoping you'd stay safe away from it all. But they found out where we were hiding. If something happens to me, Thomas needs to know that he has a father who loves him, even though he has never met him." Jackson had to sit down again, his legs no longer able to support the weight of the revelation. Eleanor protected him in the only way she knew how, sacrificing her own happiness to keep him alive. And now she was probably dead for real, along with Marcus Blackwood and anyone else who knew the truth about Canyon Rock. Thomas began to cry again, but it was a different cry, not from fear or hunger, but from a deep sadness that seemed impossible for such a small child. Her little hands clung to Jackson's shirt in desperation, as if she felt she might lose him too. The sound of horses' hooves outside made Jackson freeze. There were many horsemen rapidly approaching Copper Creek. He moved to the window and saw a cloud of dust on the horizon approaching the city. At least 10 men, mounted and armed. There was no time for more discoveries. Jackson quickly stowed the most important documents in the inside pocket of his leather vest, picked up Thomas, and carefully descended the stairs of the saloon. His horse was still where he left it, but now he was huffing nervously, feeling the approach of the other animals. He mounted quickly, holding Thomas with one hand while controlling the reins with the other. The child instantly calmed down when he felt the movement of the horse, as if he was already used to traveling. Another mystery in a list that only grew. Jackson spurred the bay in the opposite direction to the approaching horsemen, following a trail he had known since he was a teenager. It would lead straight to the hills to the north, where they could hide until they decided on their next move. But as he rode on, a certainty grew in his chest. No matter how many powerful men were involved, he would discover the full truth about what happened to Eleanor and deliver justice for the years of pain he had endured. The horsemen arrived at Copper Creek when Jackson was already 2 miles away, hidden behind a rock formation. They were Colonel Hampton's men. He recognized some even from a distance. They entered the saloon, and minutes later they ran out and scattered in all directions. They were looking for something, or by someone. Thomas pointed north again to Canyon Rock, and this time Jackson understood. It wasn't just a random direction. The child knew where they needed to go. Maybe Eleanor had taught her son about the place where it all began, or maybe it was something more mysterious. But Jackson decided to rely on Thomas's impossible instincts. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky as blood red, father and son rode towards the ghost town, where the secrets of the past were waiting to be unearthed. Behind them, the torches of the pursuers began to dot the landscape like fallen stars. Jackson didn't know what he would find at Canyon Rock, But one thing was clear. The journey that began with the crying of an abandoned baby was just beginning. And before it was over, many ghosts from the past would have to be confronted. Canyon Rock emerged from the darkness as a graveyard of lost dreams. The full moon illuminated the abandoned buildings, creating ghostly shadows that danced among the ruins of a city that once teemed with life and hope. Jackson dismounted near the entrance to what was Main Street, holding Thomas firmly to his chest. The child no longer cried, but his blue eyes shone with a disturbing intensity, as if he recognized every stone, every rotten wood of that haunted place. The silence was absolute, broken only by the wind that whistled between the empty buildings. Jackson walked slowly down Main Street, his boots echoing against the loose planks of the balconies. He passed by the old general store, the abandoned post office, the roofless church where only the wooden cross still stood against the starry sky. Thomas began to toss in his father's arms, pointing insistently to a hut down the street, partially hidden behind a rock formation. It was different from the other buildings. Smaller, more cared for, as if someone still lived there. A faint light shone on the window. Jackson felt his heart race. Was it possible that Eleanor was still alive? He approached the hut with extreme care, his right hand resting on the handle of his revolver. Every step was calculated, every sound amplified by the tension that grew in his chest. When he got close to the lighted window, he peeked through the dusty glass and saw a scene that made his legs weaken. Eleanor was sitting in a wooden chair, thinner and with longer hair than she remembered, but undeniably alive. She was tied up, with marks of violence on her face, but her green eyes still shone with the same determination Jackson had loved since the first day he saw her. In front of her, with his back to the window, a tall, well-dressed man gesticulated violently as he spoke. It was Colonel Hampton. Jackson couldn't hear the words, but his body language was clear. Hampton would question Eleanor about something, and she would refuse to answer. With each refusal, he got closer, his threats becoming more intense. Thomas stirred in his father's arms and, with a clarity impossible for his age, whispered a third word that made Jackson understand the whole truth. Alive. The child wasn't just speaking random words. All the while, Thomas tried to tell the story. Dad was alive, even when Eleanor believed he might be dead. Mum was alive, hiding in Canyon Rock. And now, alive was what they needed to remain in order for the family to finally be reunited. Jackson carefully deposited Thomas behind a pile of wood and approached the door of the cabin. The old wood gave way easily when he pushed it with his shoulder, making a dry noise that echoed in the small interior. Hampton turned quickly, hand flying to the revolver in his hip, but Jackson was faster. In a fluid motion that he honed in years of constant danger, he drew his Colt and aimed straight at the colonel's chest. Eleanor looked up, and at the sight of him, tears began to roll down her bruised face. She tried to speak, but the gag prevented any sound other than muffled moans. Hampton laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the small cabin. He was a man of 60, with perfectly combed grey hair and a neatly trimmed moustache, but his eyes revealed the cruelty he hid under the respectable facade. Jackson kept the gun pointed at the colonel as he moved slowly to untie Eleanor. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the emotion of finally finding the woman he loved and believed lost forever. When Eleanor was free, she threw herself into Jackson's arms, and for a moment 3 years of pain and separation dissolved into that desperate embrace. But reality brought them back when Hampton started talking. The colonel told the whole truth about Canyon Rock, how he and his associates discovered a silver vein richer than anything ever found in the territory, how they bribed inspectors to declare the mine exhausted, how they killed the miners who discovered the scheme, how they diverted tons of silver to private accounts, while the government believed the city was bankrupt. Eleanor discovered everything when she found abandoned documents in one of the empty houses. Marcus Blackwood, one of the few miners who survived, sought her out because he knew Jackson worked for Hampton and thought she could help expose the truth. But when Eleanor confronted Hampton, he threatened to kill the entire Ryder family. To protect Jackson and Thomas, she staged her own death during an actual Apache raid that took place in the region. He burned the house, left bloody clothes behind, and fled with the baby to Canyon Rock, where Blackwood promised to keep them safe until he gathered enough evidence to expose Hampton. But Hampton discovered the hiding place. He killed Blackwood and the others who knew the truth. Eleanor managed to hide Thomas before she was captured, trusting that the child would find a way to get to Jackson when the time came. The sound of approaching hooves interrupted the reveal. Hampton's men eventually tracked Jackson to Canyon Rock. There were at least 12 horsemen, surrounding the hut like hungry wolves. Hampton smiled with cruel satisfaction. He knew that Jackson could not fight so many men while protecting Eleanor and Thomas. But he underestimated the determination of a father who was finally reunited with his family. Jackson handed a spare revolver to Eleanor, and they strategically positioned themselves in the cabin. She was an excellent marksman, something she learned when they lived isolated on the ranch. Together they managed to withstand the first attack of Hampton's men, using the small windows and thick wooden walls as protection. The battle lasted all night. Jackson used all his experience of years facing bandits and hostile tribes, while Eleanor demonstrated a courage that made him fall in love with her again. But it was only 2 against 12, and the ammunition was running low. That's when Thomas did something that changed everything. The child came out of the hiding place where Jackson left her and walked calmly to the center of the street, right in the firing line of all the men in Hampton. But instead of shooting an innocent child, the gunmen hesitated. It was the gap Jackson needed. In a quick succession of well-aimed shots, Jackson eliminated 4 of Hampton's men. Eleanor hit 2 others who were trying to flank the hut. The rest, realizing that the battle was lost, fled in the darkness that preceded dawn. Hampton, wounded but still alive, tried one last card. He pointed his gun at Thomas, who was still standing in the middle of the street as if nothing could hurt him. But Jackson was faster. His last shot hit Hampton in the chest, knocking him down for good. When the sun rose over Canyon Rock, the Ryder family was finally reunited. Jackson held Eleanor and Thomas in his arms, tears of relief rolling down his bearded face. 3 years of pain, loneliness, and lies have come to an end on that dusty street in a ghost town. In the following days, the documents that Eleanor and Marcus gathered were turned over to federal authorities. Hampton's scheme was exposed, his associates arrested, and the families of the dead miners finally received justice. Canyon Rock has reopened, but this time with proper supervision and honestly distributed profits. Jackson, Eleanor, and Thomas have built a new life away from the cattle trails and violence of the Wild West. They bought a small farm in Colorado, where Thomas grew up hearing the story of how a 2-year-old brought a broken family together using only 3 impossible words: Daddy, Mommy, and alive. And on starry nights, when the wind blew across the plains, Jackson sometimes swore he could still hear the echo of that first word that changed his life forever, whispered by a child who knew, in some mysterious way, exactly what he needed to do to bring his father home. Did this story touch your heart as much as it touched mine when I wrote it? Sometimes family connections transcend any logical explanation, connecting souls across time and distance. The love between parents and children may be the most powerful force in the universe, capable of reuniting families even when all seems lost. Share your thoughts on this emotional journey in the comments and sign up to follow more stories that explore the mysteries of the human heart. Because in the end, we all look for someone to call us home.